Right, perfect. Okay, I think we are recording. My team, if you guys see people come in, if you can let them in the room, that would be great. Otherwise, I think we'll go ahead and get started since it is now 10. Let me get my screen up here. Well, good morning, everyone. I hope you guys are all doing well. I hope you made it through the Thanksgiving holiday. I know that it's always an interesting time in between holidays. So I hope you're able to get work done, but then also enjoy time with your families as well. Thanks for joining this morning. This is our last webinar for 2022, which is crazy. So I'm really looking forward to 2023 and more of the topics that we'll kind of hit on during that time. But to kind of wrap up our webinars for this year, we are talking today about storytelling on Main Street. So this is something that I personally am super passionate about. I think it's something that probably more of us are doing than we think we're doing. We might just not be utilizing it to its fullest. So we're going to talk a little bit about why this is so important, but also some of the ways that you can kind of really take advantage of some of these amazing stories that are happening in your community and about your organization specifically. So I actually, if you were in Auburn for the community exchange, I did kind of a marketing on Main Street presentation, but I touched briefly on storytelling. And I think the two of those conversations kind of coincide really well together. But today I'm going to focus a little bit more on just kind of the high level around starting to dig more into the stories and how we want to go about sharing those with our community. So yeah, I'm really excited. This is something too that as a coordinating program, we want to focus more on, and we're excited to focus more on it in the coming years. And so more to come about what that might look like, because we want to also tell your stories, and let the state know about what Main Street is doing in all of our downtowns where it's present. And so that's something we're really excited about. But you are welcome to post questions in the chat. There is time at the end. I think we'll have plenty of time at the end to answer any questions. But I would also love to hear how some of you might be going about telling some of these stories that I'm going to kind of touch on today. So be thinking about that, because again, as much as it's great to hear from me, I want to hear from you all who are actually doing it every day. And some of you might be doing this, and maybe you don't even know you're doing it, but I want to hear some of your expertise in this area as well. So if you have any best practices you want to share, or questions, struggles with this, whatever it might be, I'd love to hear that at the end. I know we all would. So be thinking of that as we go ahead. That being said, let's get started. So our agenda for today, first we're going to I always like to hit on the why. Why is storytelling so important for your community, but also for your organization? Then I'm going to just talk through a few kind of, again, high-level storytelling strategies. I really think that storytelling can look so many ways. It's hard to kind of hone in on. There's really no best way necessarily. I think it's really dependent on your community and what the best way is to get that story out. But I'll talk about a few best practices in my eyes. And then we're going to talk a little bit briefly on developing those marketing materials through your storytelling, because I think, again, those go hand in hand. It's hard not to talk about marketing if we're talking about storytelling. And then lastly, kind of go through, I have a couple examples that I just want to show briefly. And then again, I would love to hear any questions, but also maybe some examples from your communities. So let's go ahead and jump in. So why do we need to tell the stories of our communities? So first, stories create community pride. Each of our communities have unique traditions, history, events, stories, whatever it might be, landmarks that kind of trademark who you are as a community. And if you think that you don't have those things, you do, because we all have them. And it's really funny because I feel like when I'm telling people about what I do for my job, or I'm bragging on living in Indiana, I often, if people ever say anything that Indiana is boring, or they use kind of a stereotype of, oh, isn't Indiana just all cornfields? Often I'll pull out some of those unique stories from your communities that I've been in and that I've learned that I'm like, no, it is not all the same. There are such unique things in each of your communities. But it's really important that those unique stories around each of those things are captured, because, and they need to be told consistently to remind your community of the reason to continue to support, shop, be downtown, be excited about what's happening in downtown. I know that many of you have told me, before, that you struggle sometimes with those naysayers who are like, always kind of maybe frustrated about something, or they don't understand why the change is happening this way, or why is there so much construction in downtown, or why isn't anything, they in their eyes, why isn't anything happening in downtown, why do we have so many vacant buildings, so on and so forth. And I think that when we're intentional about telling the stories of what's happening, and also telling the stories of even what's already happened, we're capturing that community pride for people, and they're able to be really excited and get invested in those stories, and feel excited about what's happening and excited to be a part of that. So creating that community pride. Stories also create opportunities. So one of those opportunities is to tell the stories of those in the community who may not have as much of a voice. So odds are there are people in your community, whether that's in history or whatever it might be, that don't maybe always have their stories heard. And there might be an opportunity there for you to capture some stories about a group of people in your community, or whatever that might be, who you can elevate that and again enrich your community with more of that. That's a really, when we talk about kind of diversity and inclusion in Main Street, I think that's a really cool way, is making sure that you're representing the stories of everyone in your community. And so that's an opportunity to do that. It's also an opportunity to connect what's going on in downtown to certain organizations. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later on, in specific to obviously what's going on with Main Street, your Main Street organization. But in general, I think these stories can actually help create clarity for people when it comes to kind of what's going on downtown. So again, I know I've said this before, but I know many of you often are saying, people will come to you and say, oh, that event that the city put on was so great, or the event that the chamber put on, and you're like, wait, that was our event. And it's not about getting necessarily the, all the congratulations for it, but it's more about helping give people in your community clarity about whose role is kind of what. So if you do have a chamber, and you have a historic preservation board, and you have your Main Street organization and the city and so on and so forth, it's helpful to be able to kind of provide clarity to your residents of kind of this is who owns what, and how we work together, hopefully how we collaborate, but also who's kind of handling what. And so sometimes when you're able to tell stories about, maybe there's a yearly festival that you put on as the Main Street, and this has a really long time tradition, it's tied into the history of your community. If you're telling the story around that, you're also able to say, give the story of how Main Street's involved in this festival and the work that goes into putting it on. And for people, that just continues to kind of connect the dots for them of, oh, okay, this is Main Street doing this. So I think it helps for people to connect the dots on that. It's also provide opportunities to bring in volunteers or involvement from others in the community. So again, if you're being really intentional about telling the stories, not only of what has happened in your community, but what is happening. Because sometimes people can't see the transformation that's happening. You see it because we're in Main Street and we're working in it every day. So we get to see some of those smaller changes that are happening, but sometimes other people aren't seeing it. So when you're able to really capture some of that transformation, and you're able to show, oh, wow, we've gotten 5 new businesses in the past year, and here's their stories and how they came to our community, and so on and so forth. And again, connecting that back to, this is what Main Street is all about. This is what our organization is about. Hopefully that will create some excitement in people to say, well, I want to be involved in that. I want to be involved in being a part of the transformation of the community. And again, hopefully tugging at that part of their heart that is like, I want to see downtown thrive, because most people want to see, again, another thing I hear a lot is people saying, oh, many people in our community want us to go back to that place that we were once when they were a kid. Downtown was thriving when I was a kid, and that kind of nostalgia of that. And I often hear like that's kind of sometimes what brings people to Main Street is like, well, I want to be a part of bringing that back for my kids and my grandkids and the people that live here. So I think telling those stories can really create clear opportunities to kind of bring in some of that volunteer recruitment for hopefully your organization or others even. Obviously, a big part of telling stories is that it aids in historic preservation efforts. So as Main Street, that's a huge part, obviously, of what we do. But we have to remember that it's not just about preserving the buildings, but preserving the stories that live within those buildings and also just live in your community in general. Preservation work is, it's also preserving all of those stories that live there. So we want to find ways to continually learn and capture those historic stories that make our communities what they are today, and finding ways to hopefully also get those out to the community so they can really learn and understand, again, here's where we were X amount of years ago, here's where we are now, and really getting them to get invested in kind of, again, what's happening within the community. So if you currently do not have like a historic preservation group or maybe an archivist or someone in like your local library that is capturing a lot of these stories, that might be something that as a Main Street organization, you might want to get involved in and kind of try to kickstart. And then if you do have someone in your community who's doing that, partner with them and start to capture some of these stories too. So that as a Main Street organization, you can tell some of the stories of whether it's, again, buildings or just general things that happened in your community, in your downtown, and start finding unique ways to tell some of those stories. So that was kind of the overall why we want to tell those stories, why we want to capture them. So now I just want to talk a little bit about some, again, kind of high level strategies when it comes to storytelling. So the first one being that, as I kind of mentioned earlier, capturing really anything that is going on in your community. So that might be an event. So again, I kind of am going back to this example of, I know many of you have, maybe a yearly like festival or large event that might be tied into a unique aspect of your community. So, I think of like the hot dog festival in Frankfurt, or, I know Brookville does something with like chicken type like festival. But it's things that are tied into like fun, really cool, unique stories within your community. And so it's not just, okay, here's our yearly festival again, we send out kind of the promotional materials for it, but it's that you're literally capturing photos, videos, experiences, anything you can get, and you're telling people about this event, how the work that it takes to put it on every year. You're telling the history behind it, how it even came to be, how it's evolved over the years. And then really getting people, again, invested in the story. Because odds are, like, you're probably going to have a lot of people come because they know it's a fun event and it happens every year and it's a tradition. But what are those stories? What are the stories of the families who attend this? It's a tradition for their family to attend this event every year together, and they have family come from out of town. And it's, you always, when you really take the time to actually go out and ask people what this means to them, there's some really, really meaningful content there to be able to share, and again, get people invested, get people excited about what's happening. And again, don't be afraid to use that as a way to get them connected to your organization, get them invested, and want to get them to like volunteer even. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that with like marketing, but still, nevertheless, utilize those stories and tell them. So events, experiences, and opportunities. So really, again, not just, it might not just be an event, but it might be, have you been working on, do you have a facade grant program, for example? What are the stories of each of those buildings as they go through renovation? Who owns the building? Is there a business owner in there? What, as you're doing the facade renovations, hopefully, with preservation ethic in mind, what did the building used to look like? What did it used to be? Tell the stories of those buildings and share them with your community, so that when they do see the construction happening downtown, it's not just like, well, where's that coming from, and what exactly is that? But you're putting those stories out and getting people excited about the transformation that's happening. So really anything that you guys are doing, whether it's something like an event or something like, it can be all the way to small business. Maybe you're doing small business education classes. Tell the stories about those classes. What were the outcomes? What did the business owners get from those education classes? Capture some of those stories and find ways to tell them. So that kind of goes into the next piece, which is finding helpful ways to actually capture the stories. And this is where I think that, you really have to be, I think it really depends on what exactly it is you're doing and how you want to best communicate that out to people. So often the one that comes to my mind the most is like, I think video is really helpful because, when you can kind of create a cool video where you can hear from somebody, hear from their experience, that can be really helpful, but that's not always the best medium to go. So it might be writing a blog, or if you have an email newsletter, it might be telling your stories through that. Obviously, photos. Photos is a huge way to capture moments, and I'll show some examples on some cool ways to do that as well. But really, it can be a lot of different ways. Maybe you have a local radio show. So getting on and telling the stories on the local radio show, or you have a local newspaper. So doing some op-eds and sending in some stories to the local newspaper. Any of those mediums can be a really great way to get your stories out there. And I think another piece that comes with this is that obviously with anything that takes some time to capture those stories. But I do think the more that you do it, the more that it becomes kind of a natural rhythm in everything that you're doing. So, for every kind of maybe large event or, again, opportunity or something you're involved in with downtown, hopefully that can just be a part of your natural, okay, we need to make sure to capture photos of this. We need to make sure to get some quotes from the people who were impacted by this. So if they got a facade grant from you, get some quotes from them, get some background on the business owner or building owner who got that facade grant, and just kind of make it a natural part of your process. So whoever is on the committee, or whoever's on the committee or a board member who's maybe working with this specific project that you're kind of capturing some of these stories around, just kind of make it an expectation that that's something they also need to be doing in their process. And then I also think that the promotions committee, this is something that, or kind of whoever handles your marketing, this is something that if you can find someone who's really passionate about capturing these kinds of stories, that can be really, really helpful. So something that comes to mind was we were just in Auburn for the community exchange, and I know some of you were there as well. And they actually had an intern who she is now in school to be like a news anchor. And so she was really passionate about capturing a lot of these stories, and she kind of just took it on herself to go and just take her camera and go out, and she would interview business owners to tell their stories. She did like a whole piece on this really cool Christmas experience that Auburn has, which is that they light Frosty every year. And it's this big lighting piece that goes on their wall in their downtown. And everyone gets so excited about it. There's a huge community turnout the night that they light Frosty. But she actually went in and got the history of Frosty, where this all started, where it's gone over the years, and really captured the whole story of it, and has basically created a little documentary about it, which was really cool. But that's a great example of finding someone in the community who was passionate about not only, going in and kind of learning about this themselves, but wanting to actually put it together to then get it out to everybody else. So if you have someone on your board, or of someone in the community that loves to do that and is just a natural at kind of going and learning some of these stories, or enjoys putting them together, whether that's a videographer who would donate some of their services, which by the way, you don't have to have a videographer. You can also just all of our iPhone cameras are pretty nice nowadays. So even if all you have the ability to do is, use your iPhone camera, that's okay too. Use the resources that you can. And then, over time, you can always work your way to, if you ever want to do something a little bit more bigger, but you don't have to have a professional team to do, video and photo. Just use what you can, and use these stories to help fuel that. Um, and then embrace, obviously, your historic stories, like I already said, but also find ways to engage the community in them. So don't just stop at gathering the historic stories that I was mentioning earlier. But actually find ways to engage the people in your community. So a lot of you are already doing this. And I've heard a lot of really cool examples from many of you, but those could be things like a historic walking tour where somebody is actually, people are able to come walk around downtown and someone is telling them the stories of these buildings. So doing more of a verbal, storytelling experience. It could be things like the historic home tours or upper story tours, or a written brochure, or I mean, the opportunities really are endless with this. And again, you might have already a historic preservation group that's doing some of these things, which is great. So just find ways to support them too and partner with them in that, and kind of capture what's happening as they're telling these stories. But yeah, don't just grab the stories and have them, but find ways to tell them in a really unique way. Another example that just came to my mind about this also is, if you guys saw anything about our Preserving Women's Legacy grant that our office did in partnership with Indiana Humanities, that's another really good example of some historic stories that were told and were representative of the women's suffrage movement. And so that's another really great example of that, is these communities, not only did they have maybe a physical piece of either art or something like that to help tell the story, they did a lot of storytelling around it. So they did a lot of different work with Indiana Humanities, and by the way, that's definitely a plug for Indiana Humanities if storytelling is something that you want to learn more about, especially with historic storytelling or pieces like that. They are another great resource to get connected to. Okay, so continuing in storytelling strategies, you can also use storytelling to inform the work you are doing in the community as a Main Street organization. So in fact, I would highly recommend that you do this, because again, I think that number one, that helps lead to some clarity for the community. Many people don't know what Main Street is. And even at the state level, we're learning that there's a lot of education we want to do with the state to continue to teach people, here's what Main Street is, here's what National Main Street is, here's kind of how it works. But the reality is that in your community specifically, we want people to be able to see the impact that you're having, because each of you is having an amazing impact. And Main Street is a long game. It's not an overnight, transformation. And so because of that, there's a lot of things happening in between when your Main Street group got started, which whether that was a year ago or 10 years ago plus, there's a lot of things that have happened over that time. And so finding ways, again, to capture all of the stories of the things that you are doing as an organization, and then always tying it back to you all, so that people are connecting the dots of, oh, I didn't realize that Main Street was the one who does the Small Business Saturday, business, whatever it might be. Maybe you just did a big event for Small Business Saturday. So but because you're kind of, again, telling the stories through photos and videos and kind of explaining the process, you're connecting those dots for people. And hopefully that will get people, again, involved with you in some way, whether that's just now they know about you, whether it's they become a volunteer or they donate to you. You can help use those stories of transformation. So find ways to, find a picture of the downtown from a while back and find one now with some of maybe you've had a lot of facade renovations, or you've been a part of helping there be a new streetscape project implemented or whatever, and do comparison photos and tell the stories of that transformation, how much work it took, and the ups and downs of that whole experience, but don't forget to capture those stories, and for you to be able to look back and see the growth. Because again, I think we get focused and we forget to see that there has been a lot of growth and positive change. So yeah, please use those stories to help inform people about who you are as a Main Street organization. Um, and again, kind of this next comment, you have most likely seen the transformation happen through small projects. So small being like even the things that you think, people don't necessarily really care about how, we painted all these benches in downtown. But I would beg to differ. I think that people would be very interested to know that, your team got a placemaking grant and you went all around downtown and painted the benches to help make it look a little bit more friendly and colorful. Or maybe you helped get a mural put up on one of the walls. What's the story behind that mural? Why did you end up choosing what you chose? So again, finding ways to capture video of the muralist as they work on the mural. I've seen some of you do that before, where you do kind of like the time lapse videos. And I think that is the coolest thing. And tell the story of the artist and who's putting it up, and again, how it came to be. So even small projects you think that people might not care to know the stories behind, still capture the stories and tell them, because I bet that that's going to create some excitement for people. And use the stories to, again, engage them, inform the community of the transformation that's happening where you're at. So that being said, developing marketing materials from the stories that you're creating. So if you are, gathering some of these quotes and maybe photos or videos, you definitely obviously have to get them out somehow to people, and they can be used as a marketing material. So again, this is kind of going back to what I said earlier, but a lot of this information I also grabbed from Locable, if you've heard of them before, but he kind of talks a little bit about like marketing, specifically marketing in regards to Main Street. So while your branding, your logo, maybe your tagline or your mission and vision, those are very important, and you need to be putting those out in your marketing materials and everything you're doing. They do need to be demonstrated and reinforced with the real world stories that I was just mentioning. So, it's one thing for you to, again, just put out there, oh, we are so-and-so Main Street, and our goal is to, revitalize downtown, or whatever your mission and vision might be. But it's a whole nother ball game when you say, we are so-and-so Main Street. Here's a story from a business owner that has gotten some support from us. And, maybe you have a business owner in your community who you were able to really help. You got them into a building, you were able to get them maybe some facade grant funding or whatever it might be. And maybe they're like really willing to tell that story, and talk a little bit about the impact that you have had on them as an organization. So that hits a lot differently when you're putting that out on your social media versus just a picture of your logo saying, we are so-and-so Main Street and here's what we do. But when it's a real person that people in your community probably have a connection to somehow, or they've shopped in their shop before, or they, whatever it might be, and then they hear, this person say, well, Main Street has been extremely helpful to me. They supported me through a really tough time. They helped me through COVID. They promote all my sales. Those are the things that really help move the needle, not only for that business owner, because that's promotion for them, but also for you, for people to see really the impact that you're having. So again, this is another reason why capturing these stories, excuse me, is so important, and putting them out into your marketing materials. So that doesn't just have to be social media. It can also be, again, through any medium in which you kind of promote yourself. So you might have an email newsletter, you might go on the radio, you might, so on and so forth, whatever it is for you. But don't be afraid to bring a business owner along on that radio interview and say, hey, I brought along so-and-so today. I wanted them to talk a little bit about, how they've been how they have interacted with us as an organization, and so on. So often, we have to remember that we talk in stories too, and we, something that this quote here of, the stories have been passed down, that is from Brian from Locable, but he often talks about how we teach in parables, and we tend to tell people about our day in story form, and we hear things in story form, and so our brains are typically just more hardwired to engage with stories, to even share them if they are in story form, rather than just being in like factual information. So again, going back to kind of what I was saying earlier, if you just have let's say you have your yearly festival that's coming up, if you're just posting, hey, come to so-and-so festival, it's on December 21st at 3 o'clock, and we will have this, this, and this, and this, and that's kind of what all you put, that is going to hit someone very differently than having a story. Maybe you put out, a story of a family who goes to your festival, like I was saying earlier, every year. That is going to hit someone differently as they're scrolling or however they're kind of taking in this story. And that's going to hopefully help them, again, engage with it some more, share it more, remember that more. Again, remember this, the kind of stories behind this festival, why it's important. So just be thinking about that, remembering that in the ways that you're kind of, while you're developing these marketing materials, how do you put it more in story form to kind of connect with people on that level? So I've kind of already talked through some examples, but the two that kind of tend to, and I talked through some of this when I was in Auburn too. So sorry, people who are at both, I'm kind of hitting this on both. But again, storytelling in downtown events, I already talked about that. If you have your yearly festival or whatever it might be, an event that you're doing that how do you tell the stories through that versus, again, just sharing the factual information, but then also storytelling in projects. So any project that you're doing, any work you're doing, if you're trying to buy, as a Main Street organization, if you're trying to buy a building in downtown, if that's something you're working towards, capture the story of that as you work towards it. Even if it's a 3-year, it takes you 3 years to actually buy the building and start to, whatever you might do with it. Tell the story of that, how you guys work to, buy a historic building in downtown or whatever it might be. Don't be afraid to capture those stories as well. So, I think often the idea of creating content, which, blogging is one kind of way that you can also share some of these stories. I know some of you do have blogs. You do not have to have a blog. Again, that might not be the most effective use of your time. It might be. So if you have, a pretty big subscriber list, or you have a blog that's already kind of pretty successful, because you promote it pretty heavily, that's one thing. But whether it's creating content for a blog or an email newsletter or social media, I can often, again, this is kind of from some of that information from Locable, but, he kind of talks some about how it can be nerve-wracking, I think, to whether it's a Main Street director or Main Street board, mostly because of, I think, sometimes the time. Are we doing it correctly? Is it a good use of our energy and time? But, I do think that, again, once you get into a rhythm of kind of making it a priority of, we're always going to try to capture some part of this project or event or story, then, kind of creating a easy to use like framework for that, can help. So hopefully this will over time reduce your like time and energy and creativity, but also use your resources that you already have. People, whether that's people. So again, going back to find the people on your board who maybe are really naturally pretty good at this. They're great, especially if it's, let's say you're going to do some writing, some storytelling through writing. If you have someone on your board who loves to write creatively and can kind of really effectively tell those stories through written word, I think utilize those skills, ask if they'd be willing to kind of capture some of the stories so that you can put it into a blog or an email, or maybe a letter that you're going to send out to people. So there's a few different types of kind of structures and framework you can kind of use to put this in. I would say, also don't be afraid just to take baby steps. And, even if it's just for a couple big projects that you're working on or a big event and a big project, start there and just say, okay, we're going to try to capture some of the stories behind, this event and this, big project that we're working on, and see how it goes as you're and decide kind of how you want to go about that. What medium do you want to capture? Some video? Do you want to capture some quotes, photos, whatever it might be? Kind of decide what medium you want to use, and then who's kind of going to be in charge of that, and who's going to be in charge of kind of compiling it. But kind of create sort of your own kind of structure to that, and then see how it goes. Just start there. And then hopefully you can kind of work it even into your work planning in kind of each area of, okay, how are we capturing what's actually happening here? So yeah, and it can be a lot of different ways to do this. You can also, part of what I think your Economic Vitality Committee can work on is producing content to spotlight your downtown merchants and business owners. Or again, as an maybe your org committee can work on telling the stories of your volunteers and your board members. I think that's a huge way to help kind of show, number one, congratulate them and say thank you to them, is promoting them and their volunteerism and their commitment to your organization. But also, again, it helps educate the community, and for people to make connections, to be like, oh, I didn't know so-and-so was on, was the Main Street board president. That's great, and it helps for them to make connections to people in your community. So each committee in each of the 4 points can kind of take on their own version of telling the different stories that kind of fall within their point. And then again, you're always kind of sharing what makes here special. So what makes so-and-so community a special and exciting place to be, because all of you have those things. All of you are special, and you're all doing amazing things. But what kind of, at the heart of it, what are those things that make you special, and what getting people excited about that? So again, kind of know that there's no perfect process behind this. And I think you really just have to kind of start trying it out and seeing what works best. Again, asking around who has a nice iPhone and maybe a tripod that can go around on your board and take some videos, and what business owners would be willing to kind of do maybe an in-person interview that, you could go in and learn about their business and put it out. Again, that's promotion for them. It's promotion for you. Win-win. So kind of just start thinking through that as a board. Okay, let me see if I can switch my screen here. Here, hold on. I have some examples, but I want to, there we go. Okay. Then, well, maybe. When I'm trying to share a different screen, so give me 1 second. Not giving me the option anymore to, oh, there we go. Okay. That's what I wanted. Okay. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Just wanted to make sure everyone could see. Okay, so this video, here, let me get through this ad real quick. So I don't know if Alexis is on today, but I showed this at Auburn's Community Exchange as well. But I think this is a really good example of a Main Street organization telling kind of a quick blurb of who they are and in a really effective video. So let me make sure here that you guys can hear it all right. Let's see. Include. Okay, perfect. So I think that should work. Someone can let me know if you guys have any issues with.
Angola Main Street has a focus in downtown Angola. We work to promote local businesses, organize events that bring people downtown to enjoy the history and the culture and the restaurants and the stores. Our job is kind of to know everything that's going on in the community and be able to coordinate with those people and make everything even that much bigger and better. When you think of a downtown, it's really the heart of the community. So we essentially are keeping that heart beating by promoting these local businesses and bringing people to the area. It's important for a community to have a lively and engaged Main Street because we are inspiring the rest of the community. When a community is really organized, they're really engaged. And when they're really engaged, they're able to take ownership, and that makes them even more proud of their community. When we develop programs, when we design projects, when we promote events, in the long run, that's what's going to make our organization and our community sustainable.
So I really love that. Make sure. Okay. I love that video for a lot of different reasons. But number one, I think from a marketing perspective, it's really short and sweet and to the point, but very effective. And just the way that she kind of breaks down what Main Street is, why it's important to Angola that they are there and the work that they're doing. But I also think it's really cool because I got to speak with Alexis before Auburn's Community Exchange, and she was saying that the Community Foundation actually kind of gave some organizations within the community kind of gave this as almost like a gift, saying like, okay, we're gonna create this video for you to kind of promote the different organizations that are making a difference in our community. And I think that's just a really cool, that made me think that that's a really also effective way, that maybe this is something that if you do want to get some more professional video taken, whether that's content about your Main Street organization or it's content about a story that you want to tell, don't forget to go to your community foundation. I know many of you already get funding from them in some way, but maybe there's another kind of fund of money that you might be able to grab from. So you could get some professional videographers or editors involved to be able to create some really cool content like that. But that's just an example, I think, of a really great storytelling medium. The next thing I wanted to show was this Storyville project, which they are an organization that actually worked with Michigan's Main Street to tell some of the stories of their Michigan coordinating program for Main Street, tell some of the stories of the local programs and the local communities that those programs are in. So I just think I would definitely encourage you to get on their website, dig around a little bit, read some of the stories. But you can kind of, I won't go through and read all of this, but you can kind of see that they kind of grabbed some of these really cool stories. So, for example, in Saginaw, they talk about at less than 50,000 people, many people see only a place of crime and poverty. But the, Riverfront Saginaw as an organization, the groups of downtown, like basically kind of showing like investment is being made and change is happening. But, so they're kind of using this storytelling approach, human spaces, human stories. So they started kind of featuring either a business or a nonprofit in Saginaw or a community leader, and then started putting those stories out to kind of tell more of and help people see more than just maybe the crime and the poverty that was in this community, but actually see that there are amazing things happening. So they also like provided some statistics of their like marketing performance after they were put some of these stories out. But I wanted to show some samples. So one interesting thing they do as well is create podcasts. So they'll like bring someone, that they kind of featured a story on and have a podcast kind of interview with them. I don't know if any of you have a podcast or maybe your city does, but that could be something that if you have the resources for that, and so that's something that you think would be effective, is having some kind of, podcast that you can invite people onto. There's a lot of ways to do podcasts now that is like, even a lot of libraries have podcast studios in them, things like that. So that could be an option. But yeah, so they told stories through written, like word and statistics, photos, obviously, again, podcasts and videos. So I think the photos, though, is really cool. So again, this was that human faces, human stories. It might take a minute to load. Maybe, there we go. So here are some of the photos that they took, which I just think are all really beautiful, beautiful photos. So again, business owners, people in the community, residents, people who are making a difference, so many different people. And again, they told stories with each of these photos. But I just think it's really moving to see, the positive response that these stories had, the way that people in the community shared this and got excited about it and got excited about what was happening in the community. So that being said, let me go. Yeah, I just wanted to show some of those examples of what that can look like. So definitely encourage you to look into that website as well. That's something that, I think can help maybe give some inspiration of what kinds of stories you could be telling. With that, we can kind of move into Q&A / again, if anyone has some experience in this or feels like they're doing this really well, or they have challenges in the area of storytelling and capturing these stories, I would love to hear that. So let me just check the chat to make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay. Oh yeah, thank you, Abby, for sharing Locable's website. And I can also share Storyville's stuff here in the chat. All right. Does anyone have any questions, thoughts? You're welcome to either throw it in the chat or unmute, whatever you prefer. I see a hand up. Oh, Anne, go ahead.
I did want to just mention when you did talk about our intern and how she went around and established videos around our community. I was in partnership for Meet Main Street, and then she also did a series on her own. We did work in partnership. We used our iPhones for a lot of them. So just so you know, people, you do not have to go get expensive cameras. However, we also were able to borrow from our library. We worked with them to use cameras from the library. I think she mentioned that at the community exchange, but we did not have a budget for a nice camera. So we worked with the library to use theirs, and so we coordinated that. So just food for thought too. We did want to use a nicer camera for a lot of those videos and to do those shots. So as much as we could. And so we did try to get our hands on a nicer camera, and we did use that a lot. So there might be ways around that if you want to get your hands on a nicer camera.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I know. Please, yeah, use your libraries. Like, I feel like libraries have so many untapped resources that that are there, like video cameras, or like I mentioned earlier, maybe your library might have like podcasting, tech that you can use. So if that's something you're interested in.
They also had the microphone, so we could mic each other up. So that
great.
was another way that we could get the audio to work a little bit stronger. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Cool. Oh, and I think I saw in the chat, Laura said, I'll brag on our design committee. They have researched building histories and created large format display boards that can go into downtown windows. I love that. That's a great visual, like, storytelling experience for people to be able to see, to walk downtown and see, this is what this building used to look like. And to kind of be able to visually, like, put themselves there for a minute. So I love that, Laura. That's great. Who else? Questions, ideas, ways that you guys go about. Again, I think many of you are doing this probably more than you think. You might just not always be thinking of it as intentionally as that you are working on storytelling efforts, but I know many of you are working on this.
Abby, I'll just chime in here and say, you mentioned Indiana Humanities. They do I believe it's twice a year, a grant to help with resources to do storytelling. So be on the lookout for that if you need some resources. I think it's $1,000 grant. So that can really help with like printing of materials or, hiring somebody to help you do it or getting some of that equipment that you may need.
Yes, that is a really good point. I just stuck their website in our chat. So please, and they have like a grants tab on their website. So yeah, look into the grants and the opportunities they have, because that is very true. And this is like what they're all about, is like telling the stories of Hoosier stories of what's happening in Indiana. So yeah, definitely utilize them. Anyone else? Laura said that I had several ideas as you were speaking, Abby. One of them was to tell the stories of how Madison was desegregated, maybe in conjunction with MLK Day, involve several of our downtown businesses. Yeah, that's kind of going back to telling those stories too of history and making sure you're elevating voices of everyone in the community and using it. You can use it as a way to also to do that. So I love that. That's awesome, Laura. It's a really good idea. Anyone else? Ideas, questions? Again, I know a lot of this it's pretty like, I think when it comes to storytelling, it's a lot of high level ideas. And then again, you have to really think through for you specifically, because I think it's different in every community, what might be the best way to go about it. Oh, good. Thank you, Andrea. I'm glad you liked this topic. And this is, again, something that as a coordinating program, we want to focus more on. Again, for us to find ways for you all, for us to tell your stories too, and to promote what you're doing. Because I know, again, we get the privilege of seeing your stories and hearing them from you all. But so we will definitely try to be focusing on this topic more and more. But great. Okay, well, with that, unless anyone else has any final questions or thoughts, we will go ahead. I'll leave you with some extra time in your day, but please feel free to reach out if you want to talk about this more or you want to know where you can find more resources. Again, some of those websites, whether it's Locable, he kind of talks again specifically around like marketing, how to cross promote. He gets a little bit more technical with that. So, and he has like some software. I don't totally remember how it all works, but feel free to look into his information. He also has a book that he released recently that I want to give a read to. So yeah, go on his website, visit Storyville, Indiana Humanities, all those resources. And yeah, we'll talk more about this in the future, but I hope everyone has a great day. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and we'll talk to you all soon. Thanks, everyone.